Yo, what is good, everyone? Welcome to the Can't Believe I Made It podcast season finale. I am your podcast host, high performance mentor, and performance expert, Dezi Abeyta. Let's dive into this season of All Stars, where the season has been about diving deep into the art of the pivot. Let's be honest, life is unpredictable, often throwing curveballs that demand a change in direction. It's a scary endeavor. I totally get it. Today, we're privileged to be joined by exceptional athlete entrepreneurs who've not only mastered this very art, from the sports arena to the boardroom to running their own businesses. Their journeys are a testament to the power of resilience, adaptability, and the courage to embrace change. These stories are monumental shifts of risks taken and challenges to overcome, all to discover a new passion and purpose. So whether you're at a crossroads yourself or just in need of some inspiration, tune in as we uncover the secrets behind flourishing in the face of adversity. Our first episode that we're going to be celebrating is our episode with Briana Butler, a WNBA athlete turned dietitian, maximizing her potential and her messaging inside of people of color in those communities and navigating that in such a beautiful way. I'm super excited about this episode. I'm going to be chiming in and out of these stories. I hope it speaks to you, and I hope it speaks to your heart in a way where it pushes you to go out and do that next scary thing that you know that you have to do. Enjoy, friends.
Man, I thought about it the other day. I was like, you know what? I need to go hoop. I need to get myself some basketball shoes. I don't even have shoes. That's how rusty I am. Like I need shoes. So yeah, that's my passion at heart. Always been a hooper. And coming from Houston, the basketball scene was, everything at that particular point in time. We have a lot of ladies from the Houston area that are in the WNBA now. So a lot of the people that I played against on a regular basis, a lot of my closest friends, one that I just was with this past weekend, WNBA, because that was just the culture at the time. A lot of us went D1. My sister and I were both McDonald Americans coming out of high school, and we both went to USC. That's how close we were, right? So that'll preface a little bit of what I'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But super close. We decided to go out to USC together because we had actually played on a California club team. Club basketball, for those of you that know, like high school basketball, club sports, it's a lot. It's crazy. But I will say it got me in front of a lot of eyes of coaches and stuff like that. So went out to USC, played ball there 4 years. That's actually where I met my husband, Bryce. So we met going into our freshman year of college. He played football. I played basketball. 4 years there, ended up doing really well, setting a lot of records. And when it was all said and done, I had a decision to make. Was I going to continue my career and go play pro? Or was I going to pursue something in the health field or education field or something like that? Because I got my bachelor's in human performance, minor in health promotion and nutrition. I knew I wanted to go into nutrition at some point in time, but I wasn't quite sure when, where, and how. And so at the point of graduation, I'm like, all right, what am I going to do? Like, am I going to pursue sports after spending like 20 years of my life dedicating time to this? Or am I going to like
it's so
go back to
much
school? Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the fact that I've put in 20 years of work and I'm going to try, right? Like, I think the worst thing you can ever do is wish that you would have and said like, maybe I shoulda, woulda, coulda, and I was like, I can't do that to myself. I owe myself the chance to try. So I ended up getting drafted to the Washington Mystics coming out of college. And I got a welcome to the league for my first training camp. It was horrible. Like I was like, freaking, what is this? These girls,
is different.
They're
faster, they're stronger.
Oh my gosh.
They're smarter.
Smarter, all the things. Like you can never, and you come from in college, like being that girl, like I'm that person.
Yeah.
And then I go to like the league and they're like, no, you're not. Like,
no, you're not.
You're a rook. And I was like, okay. So totally bombed that training camp, ended up getting released. And after that, I just told myself, all right, you know what? Like, I think I can do this and I just need to work harder. So went to China, came back, ended up getting picked up by the Phoenix Mercury and spent the rest of the season with the Phoenix Mercury. went overseas, played ball in Poland. For those of you that don't know about WNBA and overseas, once you finish WNBA, you go overseas
Yeah.
because that's where you get paid.
Hmm.
And that was my first experience leaving the country, like leaving my family and everyone for a long period of time. And that was a lot. That kind of shook me a little bit. It made me grow into a woman. And at that point in time, when I started going overseas for the first time, that's when I started taking classes that were nutrition focused. Because I'm like, oh, well, I've got a lot of free time on my hands. Why not go into something nutrition focused? After that, came back, ended up getting engaged, played more WNBA for the Phoenix Mercury for that next following year. And then I decided not to go overseas. I stayed home after that WNBA season and really just like focused on really diving into nutrition a little more seriously.
Pivoted.
Yeah, I pivoted. And you'll notice like through this story, there's a lot of pivots that
I was
happen,
going to say
right?
that. I mean, I just found the title of this
Yeah.
podcast.
Hey, like pivot. And it's almost like it should be my middle name at this point. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, and that's one thing you'll learn about me. I'm not afraid to do it. When I
Yeah.
realize that it's time and I really want to make a decision to do something, I do it. So
Hmm.
I knew for me, like I could see the writing on the wall. I'm like, well, basketball's not gonna last forever. I know I want to get into nutrition. Like, what do I need to do? And then I started figuring out like you got to go through didactic programs and all this. And I'm like, shoot, like now I really got to dedicate time to
Organic
this.
chemistry, like,
Oh my gosh. I was like, why do I need this? So
yeah.
some of that, and when you're older, you're not like fresh in college anymore and you're having to take these classes. You're like, wow, like I feel like I'm pretty far removed. So anyway, after that season, ended up getting married. This is 2014, got married. And right after that, I pretty much went straight into training camp. And that shook me again because I was like, shoot, I just got married. Like I want to be here. I want to be spending time with my husband, but I still loved ball. So ended up playing some more WNBA and went overseas. So our first year of marriage, I'm overseas. And that was eye-opening in and of itself. I was actually in Belgium. So it was nice. He actually came over. He was playing with the Raiders at the time. We met up in London because he was playing in the London game that year. He
Oh,
came
yeah.
over.
I
Like
remember
it was
that.
nice, like
Yeah.
it was, all the travel, it was
Power
great.
couple.
Yeah, like it was lovely.
Yeah.
But after that, like even with him visiting overseas, I still was just like, something was kind of tugging at my heart. Like, I don't know. And then I was still wondering, I was kind of at a crossroads with my career because with WNBA, it's very difficult. Like it's one of those things where it's hard work to get in and it's hard work to stay in. It's not
Yeah.
an easy thing. And you really have to kind of go through the trenches to find a long-term spot in the league.
Mhm.
And so after I played overseas in Belgium that year, came back with Indiana fever. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I don't make the team this year, like, I'm probably going to just like call it quits. Went ahead and signed my contract to go overseas because you do that ahead of time. You don't wait. You sign your contract.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, all right, well, regardless of what happens in the NBA, I'm going overseas. Signed to go to Australia. Ended up making the Indiana Fever team, but then got released later. And I was just like completely crushed because I'm like, dang, I promised myself that
Yeah.
I would say, all right, I'm done. So I was like, all right, well, I'm still going to go to Australia. I'm not going to do WNBA anymore. Actually, it still ended up getting calls from teams, but I was like, not doing it. I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm not going to put my life on hold anymore. I'm going to continue to pursue my dreams. Signed my contract. I'm supposed to go to Australia 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out. My dad's visiting in Oakland. He's like, are you going to start training? You're supposed to be leaving. And I'm like, I don't know. And at that point in time, I was like, I'm done. I'm not going to play anymore because I don't even have the passion to go pick up a ball to train. And I was like, that means that if I go over there, I'm not going to be the player that I know I should be. And so I had to have a hard conversation with myself and say, hey, is this going to be it? Are you going to be done with ball altogether? And if you are, you need to be serious about it because now there's more than you that's involved. Now your husband's involved, you're involved, there's two of y'all. and I decided to stay home. And it was like the shot heard round the world. I was getting calls from teammates. They're like, "What are
Like,
you
where are you?
doing?
Yeah.
What?" My agent was pissed. The team was pissed. Everybody was hot, and I was like, I got to do what I got to do.
Yeah.
So that was a
I'm
huge pivot
good.
for me.
I'm good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, hey, I'm fine with it. It was 2015, and I felt really good about that decision. But that was a huge, huge pivot for me, letting go of something that I cared about a lot. And right after that, that's when I started really diving into nutrition even more. So applied to UT Southwestern's didactic program and coordinated program, because I was like, if I'm going to do this, I need a master's and I need to be able to get all this stuff done at once. I do not
Yeah.
have time to go back and forth and then go through and apply and all this stuff. So ended up going through that program. After the first year of my program, found out that we're pregnant with my son, middle of grad school.
God.
Middle.
Ah.
I was like, what? Yeah. Now, granted, we, had always said that we wanted to have kids, but it was one of those things where like the timing was impeccable. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in the
Yeah.
middle of school. Like, what am I freaking gonna do? I just felt unprepared.
Yeah.
But I knew, like, all right, all these plans and dreams that I had to go, work at some college or work with some professional team to do like sports nutrition, because that was now my passion. Like, I was really into that, had gone down the drain. At least I felt that. And I was like,
Yeah.
I got to shift now again, because I'm a mom and I want to be there for my kids and all these things. And mind you, my sister and I had also started Power Portions in 2015 too. So we
Mhm.
have a business. I'm in grad school, all the things. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Going through your first trimester, like,
Look, I'm in the hospitals, like, doing my rounds
Ugh.
with, like, morning sickness. I'm like, "Oh my god,"
Yeah.
like, "What did you eat today?" So
Yeah.
it's just crazy,
That's
and it's,
yeah.
gosh, I mean, but it was such a good experience too for me, because I realized, you know what, sis, like, hey, you did that. You got
Mhm.
through that, and once again, I told myself, like, hey, I'm going to finish school, because I had told myself that I was going to do it. And
Yeah.
so finished school, ended up like pivoting with the company, because at that point we're like, all right, well, we got to make some changes now. We started out as meal prep, but we couldn't do meal prep anymore. It's like, we're not going to do that anymore. Not going to travel back and forth from Houston to Dallas, all the things. And we also said, all right, how does it work, with the nutrition stuff? Like, am I going to be doing consults? Am I, what does that look like? So we were doing one-to-one consults, things like that. But, and that was fine until we found out we were pregnant with number two. And that brings you up to speed, because when number
God.
two came, hey, throw it all out the window. Okay. Like, everything changed, I think, about me as a mother and what my priorities were. Even though, like, with my son, I was like, you know what? I can do this. I can juggle all the things. I can spend time with one-to-one clients. I can,
Mhm. Yeah.
go work for this team. I can do all the contract work. I could do the media work. It was fine. I was managing it. But when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, I was like, oh no, like, bringing in another one, I got to change something. Um, but I didn't. And I knew I needed to change something, but I didn't actually change it.
Mhm.
And that is what got me to the point where I was like, all right, I'm stuck. I'm broken. I'm spread thin. I don't
Mhm.
have anything left to give the most important people in my life, right?
Yeah.
Like, my son, my husband, my daughter, they were getting what was left of me. And
Yeah.
that wasn't okay with me. And I was just like, you know what? People are going to need nutrition for a really long time. Like,
Yeah.
once my kids are grown, like, all things, people will still need nutrition at that point in time. But will my kids need me as much when they're 18, 19? Maybe, but they really, really need me right now.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't afford to continue that path. So I had to make some changes. But just like you said, like, you make the mistakes and you go through the trauma of,
Mhm.
shoot, like, I knew I needed to, like, do something different, and I chose to not change. And here we are now, like the baby's crying, my son's like throwing things against the wall, like husband's not happy, I'm not happy, like all the things. And from the outside looking in, it looks great, right? Like social media gives off a perception that
Yep.
everything is put together, right? But you know in your heart, like, this is not, like, it's not working. And
Yeah.
so that's how we got to, long story short, very, very long story, but that's
I
how we
love
got
it.
to that post.
Gosh, I love chatting with her, not only just because she's one of my dear friends, but also because of her story. This next guest was one of our all-stars as well. He's someone who I have continually looked for in not only paying homage to those that came before me, but doing so in a way where it upholds my legacy. This next guest is Thosh Collins, the author of The Seven Circles. Him and his wife have been doing such beautiful work inside of the indigenous communities at large by helping them to understand that a lot of the habits and the rituals that they once knew can be done to this day. I hope you enjoy as Thosh describes the story of what caused him to go out and not only take a look at his relationship with alcohol and take a look at his relationship with how he distracts himself, but doing so in a way where he's been able to maximize his effort into creating a story worth telling and helping people to do the same. I hope you enjoy.
Towards that, but I always have a vision, and I always encourage everyone as well to always have a vision, and
Yeah.
every day is about getting one step closer to that vision. And
Yeah.
so to take it back, like what you had asked, um, for those that are not familiar with where I come from, but I was born and raised on the Salt River Reservation. Our original name is the Anakamir O'atam, the Salt River people, and
Mm-hmm.
our reservation is located just outside of what is now known as Scottsdale, Arizona. And I was raised there, and I moved away at 19 to go to college in San Francisco, and later on moved down to Los Angeles and did freelance photography. And but being raised in my community, I was fortunate to be raised within the cultural values of our
Yeah.
people. And so I've always carried that with me, and that's who I am. There's a certain values that we live by, but also growing up during the res on the res during that time, as much beauty as I experienced with our cultural values and being raised in community, I also experienced a lot of grief and trauma in the
Yeah.
community as a result of loss of land or loss of
Mm-hmm.
culture, loss of lifestyle, and the diseases that we see that are prevalent, not just amongst our people, but really all human beings.
Yeah.
Diseases such as addiction, depression, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, cancer, they're all new diseases that in people in pre-industrial era, pre-colonial era had virtually no experience with.
Yeah.
Growing up on the res, it's really prevalent because just how much our people have been impacted negatively
Mm-hmm.
by the colonial process. So that's something I'd seen growing up. And when I started getting into my 20s, I started to see that there was this indigenous wellness movement, which
Mm-hmm.
was a movement that was intentionally helping to heal. There was an intentional movement to heal our people from the persisting impacts of historic trauma. And so I got exposed to that as a youth and kind of would pop into some of the gatherings, and then left me for a while when I moved to the city, and I experienced the stress going from the reservation to the
Yeah.
city was like a huge culture shock. I didn't realize, what I was doing, and nobody really prepared me for it. I guess my family and the community were like, all right, he wants to go do photography in the big city. All right. And,
Yeah.
people
Good
supported
luck.
me. Yes, people
Yeah.
supported me. They were very supportive, but when I got there, it was the culture clash, and that was the first time I'd experienced the use of alcohol and substances, and
Mm-hmm.
and so I went on this about 8, 9, 10 year journey of experimenting and thinking I was being social with these things, but I always knew these weren't congruent with the cultural values I was raised with. This is
Yeah.
not congruent with the teachings that the healers and the medicine people I was raised around had taught me to stay away from. And then I always knew in my head, oh, I'm going to get away from this at some point. And then as time went on, I got more involved with the Native wellness movement, and it helped me kind of get out of that phase there. And I would say, yeah, about 10 years ago, I've started to dedicate my life to contributing to the Indigenous wellness movement.
Mm-hmm.
And Chelsea and I met in about 2013, which is 10 years ago, which is what you had said that you had started kind of peeking into what I was doing at that time. And together we developed an Indigenous wellness initiative called the Well for Culture.
I love
And
it.
yes, the whole initiative was to help our people to bridge the gaps that we were seeing between fitness, eating well, bridge that between our original cultural modalities of foodways, movement, and sort
Mm-hmm.
of making this hybrid approach of what we learned from these modern modalities and on what we learned from oral tradition from our cultural
Yeah.
leaders in our communities. So we kind of put that together. And at the time, nobody was doing that really in Native country on social media. So
Yeah. No.
today it's prevalent. And I like to think that we had a part in that, but others were also arriving at that conclusion at that
Yeah.
time too, when people were starting to do things. So and I was also sitting on the board for the Native Wellness Institute. And so I had some experience with traveling Native country and visiting other Indigenous communities and learning about the similarities between our worldviews and cultural practices, and being able to shadow people who were facilitating Indigenous wellness circles, practices, and things like that. And so that's what Well for Culture was sort of born out of that. And
Yeah.
going forward, we developed a model called the Seven Circles, and we created that in about 2018. And the Seven Circles is foodways, sleep, movement, ceremony, sacred space, connection to land, and community.
Mm-hmm.
And we created that because traveling around Native country, we found ourselves talking about very specific life ways, and we sort of started to conclude that the the pathways to healing from the historic trauma and grief lies
Mm-hmm.
within those original lifeways of our ancestors. So we said, let's make it simple and comprehensive. Let's put them, and we put everything in a circle. As Native people, we understand
Yeah.
things cyclical, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to pillars or bullet points, because
Yeah.
typically what that does is it fosters a very compartmentalized thought process. So when
100%.
we
Yeah.
have these circles, they are connected. The circles are life ways, and the circles, if you move one, you're going to shake the whole system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like us physiologically. All the different systems we're made up of is cyclical. It's all interconnected. So those seven circles are life ways, and they affect your spiritual, your physical, your mental, and emotional states of being. So,
Mm-hmm.
and those are all interconnected as well. So that's what our healing and wellness model is about. And then we wrote the book on it, which the book is a way to appropriately share that with all people, of the world. So it's sort of our contribution is to young Native people, to the collective movement of healing, and people to get in touch once again with what it means to be human, and
Mm-hmm.
to be understand their role within this interconnected web of life. And so that's sort of the book is our attempt to try to share another perspective, a very bare bones template that people
Yeah.
could follow to reconnect in that way.
Man, I'm not gonna lie to you. Like, I had some absolute guilt because I sent you the story and I was like, "Yo, I picked up the book, excited to read." And at the time, I was like, "All right, I think there's 250 pages. I can knock this out before we get to the interview. Like, I'll be good." So I started it this last week, and I was like, "Crap, I don't know if I can do this. I got to run through this." But what was really nice, and it's an approach that I am just completely aligned with. But I might butcher what the theme was, but the message that I got was, just like wellness or just like the things that are inside of this book, you're going to come to it at the pace that is good for you, right? You're going to
Yeah.
come to it whenever you come to it. And I think it was a really nice look, Thosh, into not only empathy for where the person is at, but really speaking to their humanity. And
Yeah.
I really, really loved that aspect. And I'm wondering, just from a cultural perspective, you had said inside of the indigenous culture, indigenous wellness, like there is this movement that you and Chelsea likely have a heavy hand in. Um, you're saying that it's a movement right now. And I think my big question here, just from personal experience inside of the Latino culture, when we talk about generational trauma, if we look at, our elders, if you will, they're not comfortable talking about it. And
Yeah.
it's just something that they know, but it's not something that outwardly they're going to talk about. And I wonder for you, are people in the community talking about this, or is it something that you and Chelsea and other leaders are leading? Like, how does that go about?
Yeah, absolutely. To give context, and typically a lot of the native people in the United States and native people in Canada are sort of in the same, they also sort of, we all subscribe to the same narratives when it comes to healing and wellness. And there shouldn't be any barriers between us and indigenous people to the South. But unfortunately there is, and that's
Hmm.
shows how powerful borderlines are in politics, policy, language,
Yeah.
sometimes it seems like we have more relationships built between us here and indigenous people, like in Hawaii, or Aboriginal people in Australia, or Maori
Hmm.
people in New Zealand, than we
Yeah.
do with indigenous people, in Mexico and the
Yeah.
South.
Yeah.
Even though we're all connected, and we're all the same people.
Yeah.
So the narrative around addressing historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, collective cultural trauma, unresolved grief is
Yeah.
pretty prominent amongst both people, First Nations people in Canada, and all of us here in the States.
Hmm.
And just maybe 10 years ago, it was not. And it has really increased over time, especially with the certain events that may have happened in dominant society, such as the revealing of unmarked graves of
Yeah.
indigenous children who were sent to boarding schools throughout the United States and Canada. And that was something that has been uncovered for the past 2 years. And it really opened the eyes to a certain faction within the United States and Canada about the history. So, things like that happening. Also, the movement to create awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's a whole phenomenon where Indigenous women and girls are at higher risk of sexual assault or
Hmm.
violence than their non native counterparts. And that has been something that has come to the forefront in the recent years, especially. There's even some federal policy happening since this new administration. So that sort of put more eyes on that narrative. So to answer your
Yeah.
question, it's a lot more. These topics are more discussed, and people are more open to them in these recent years. But it took a long time.
Yeah.
It took a long time because, just like what you had said in Latino culture, with amongst some elders within
Hmm.
within those communities, we had the same thing, and there probably still is a faction of elders in our communities who would rather not talk about some of these topics because some of them had directly experienced it, or some of them have
Yeah.
been conditioned to become
100%.
enculturated into American culture, for sure.
I really value what you and Chelsea are doing because, and I've said this on other guest podcasts, and it's my stuff, and it's something that I have to continue to work through. But I really value the type of people like yourselves who are able to be present in the pain enough to talk about it. Because when I do think about the injustice, when I do think about all of the things that you had talked about, I can sit with the pain, but it's really hard for me to articulate like how I'm feeling because it's really just grief and anger. So like
Yeah.
I wonder for you, and I don't know if this is something that you've just acquired over time, but and I don't want you to speak for Chelsea, but if we're speaking to you both as a unit, if you will, like how have you guys how do you take care of yourselves enough to be like, okay, well, this is our thought process around it? Because, and I don't know from a book perspective if you and Chelsea both contributed, and Chelsea did most of the writing, because it had said like you're the photographer, videographer, and Chelsea writes. But I really loved the introduction and the things that were said, because I was like, this is such a beautiful way to articulate pain, but also the fucking facts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that you recognize that, and that certainly has something that we have learned to articulate and regulate our emotion over time, is Native people who are constantly faced with some of the grief and trauma,
Yeah.
by watching family members, loved ones, and even ourselves, but still needing to be able to move forward, and having grit and
Yeah.
resilience is a part of our culture, and it's our
Yes.
cultural values. It's something we've learned, that in order for us to thrive within this society, this complicated world, that we must be able to have a balance and harmony of being okay to feel our feelings,
Yeah.
being okay to feel pain, being okay to feel hurt, but also being able to muster up enough strength to keep a vision of how do I want to feel? How do I want to act? How do I want to think? And
Hmm.
what are the steps that I need to take to get there? So we have these two, you know, these two things here, these two circles that are
Yeah.
overlapping, and they're always going to overlap. We're always going to be healing from something. There's no finish line to healing. We're
There's
always
not.
moving.
Another great one. Just like anything else, if you want to hear the full conversations, make sure that you go back into season 8 so that you can hear their full stories. We're only giving you a glimpse into a lot of these conversations because I think the metrics have proved you guys love these types of episodes. So into season 9, we'll talk a little bit about this as we close the episode. But we're going to be doing a lot more of this because I know that these stories really speak to you, and it kind of gives you a high level glimpse into some of the things and conversations that we're having inside of the Can't Believe I Made It pod. Now, this next guest is actually someone that I have worked with personally. He was a professional athlete, now turned alpine athlete, that I really just loved his story. We all get to those moments in our life where we know that a certain path is no longer working for us, and it's time to go out into our hero's journey and to go into that next journey, into that next step. And Tucker Newhouse is a perfect person to learn from. I hope you guys enjoy.
Um, yeah, so just a little bit about myself, I guess. Um, I got drafted by the Milwaukee Brewers when I was 17, signed a few weeks before my 18th birthday. I grew up
That's nuts.
in a baseball family. My dad was a college coach and a scout. So I grew up around the game. Baseball was a part of my life from the time that I could even comprehend what it was.
Yeah.
And then it was just such an organic thing. It was like I grew up in this environment. It's what I spent all my time doing, my focus, energy, just like the camaraderie of it was amazing. And then it ended up leading in to my first career, which was super cool. That was like never really an expectation. I just kind of fell into
So
it.
you didn't feel like you were going to make it when you were younger. I
I
mean, you were
mean,
around it.
yeah, every kid has the dream of playing in the big leagues or the World Series or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But I never had that expectation. I was just like, oh well, it was more day to day for me. It's just like the experience, and I still try to hold on to that philosophy no matter what I'm doing, and not try and get too high or low or have these crazy expectations. And I don't know, that just that approach to things doesn't really work out for me very often.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Which
that's
is
like
not
my
which is not the which is not what happens with other athletes.
yeah. Well,
Especially what
I don't enjoy the pressure that's obviously there's pressure that's put on you
Mhm.
once you have that limelight on you. But putting pressure on myself, it's like
Yeah.
you show up with this attitude and how you want to approach every day, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. You figure out
Yeah.
that was kind of always my approach too. It's like I didn't want to have all these like grand dreams and expectations, and then I come out of it and I'm like, wow, it's a total failure. All that was a waste of time, which some people can find themselves. But especially with baseball, it's like anything. It can become like a vicious cycle of you set these goals and then you get to that goal and then it's the next one. It's like never ending. You
just move the goalposts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like where it's defining success, right? Which is a whole nother conversation.
We could spend a whole series of 10 episodes talking about that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously you got drafted.
Yep.
You played a couple seasons and then you tapped into your rehab stints, right? Like another phase of your life. I mean, I don't know the background, Tuck, so I would love to learn like what happened from getting drafted and then recognizing like where your true values really lied.
Yeah, I think the biggest season, I think it was my fourth or fifth year. Like a week into the season, I broke my hand, and that was the most prepared I'd ever felt, like mentally and physically, for a season. And I was like, this is going to be my breakout year. I had a really good first week of the season, broke my hand, and that was my first summer in rehab. And then that off season ended up playing in Australia. So I spent 3 months there, and then I lived in Hawaii for a little bit before that. And kind of the world of travel, international travel, and experiencing different cultures. Obviously, there's like subcultures traveling all over the U.S. But that ignited just this, which I'd always had, like the curiosity of what's out there, what the world's like. But that was like the first time that I got to experience that. And it really changed my relationship with baseball playing in Australia, because there's just that one league. There wasn't a hierarchy. There's a salary cap. It's like, you know that you're only there for 3 months, and just the clubhouse was different. Your relationships to coaches was different. It was so enjoyable. So that was like the big pivot in life and in my approach to baseball. And then the following seasons, like my numbers started getting better. I was having way more fun. And then the year that I got injured, that was the best season that I was having in my career. I made the All-Star game. I was like, possibly thought that the September call-up may have been in the mix. Like things were starting to kind of work out.
Damn.
And then
I didn't know this. Shit.
Yeah. So I was, kind of on a high at that point. And then found out that I had a torn labrum, got surgery, and then just kept having complications. Ended up having another 2 surgeries after that within 18 months or something. And then my contract ended, went into free agency a week out of a surgery. And then COVID hit, and I was like, I think I'm done with this. I started finding other interests, and I was pretty burnt out just by the business of it at that point. I was like, there are new things that were grabbing my curiosity, and like life was clearly heading in a different direction.
Tucker, that part is nuts to me, because I'm seeing a lot of similarities. Again, having a lot of guests on who they themselves were professional athletes, and then they started getting that tailwind of, it doesn't always have to be like this. Like other things are capturing my interest. And even just you telling us a little bit of the story, I'm seeing some themes. Like the first time that you got injured, you said that you were the most mentally prepared that you had ever been.
Yeah.
And then this next time around, you were like having the season of your life, where September call-ups might have been in the cards, and then something happened. So I know that you and I have had this conversation to some extent.
Yeah.
But I would love to have it again and resurface it. How do you come back from something like that? 'Cause, I mean, again, we put expectations on ourselves, which I think none of us are immune to.
Yeah.
But when things don't go your way, like what do you tap into at that point, Tuck?
Well, unfortunately, a lot of it's just time. It's like whether it's
time heals.
Yeah. No, it's like, as cliched as it is, that's what I've found. It's like, but then obviously coming out of my career. Then COVID hit, and it was like everything was shut down. We're in a global pandemic, and I was like, "Fuck, what do I do now?" I was like,
Yeah.
I have some stuff that I'm interested in, and then everything's closed. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I was in a weird space for a while. I was like just in this limbo stage where I was like, dude, I have no idea
Yeah.
what's next for me, what I'm doing now. It was a tough time, as it was for everybody.
Yeah.
Not to make myself sound like the victim. But no, a lot of it, same thing. It's like the approach of just taking it day by day and having some sort of faith in what's calling out to you, like what you feel in your heart and what you feel inspired by. It's like I always feel if you chase that, even if it doesn't work out however you thought it might, which it almost never does.
Dude, those are facts.
Yeah.
Those are facts. It's like the most frustrating thing
Yeah.
about the universe. You're like, dude, I had a plan, and the universe is like, hey, fuck off. Like, you don't know what you want.
Right. Which that's kind of how I live now. It's like I can have an idea of something in my head, but I know that ultimately it's like being able to be flexible and malleable in that. It's like that's how comfort is found. Is like, yeah, you can throw me wherever you want, and like I'll adapt to it. Which is that's kind of how I try and live now. Is trying to be as adaptable as possible.
Adaption's a hard thing. It's a skill that you learn over time through a lot of failure.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like I adapt really well, and at the same time, it doesn't come without its really, really hard moments. I mean, if we're looking back at the pandemic, it obviously changed a lot of people for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
For you, looking back at that time, I mean, it was time to embrace the pivot.
Yeah.
Right? We've talked a lot about this with a lot of our guests, and I think it's a theme that continues to come up that I really want us to like really dive into, Tuck. So like, what was the embrace the pivot moment, and how has that pivoted into what you're doing today, which to me is like, he's outside, he's connecting with his higher power. Like, this seems great.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't think that there's like one aha moment. I don't think there's like a pivot moment or anything. Definitely, I mean, my life now kind of revolves around snowboarding and mountaineering. That's like where life has taken me. But yeah, there wasn't like this one moment where it's just been like a chain of events where it's like this has worked out, this hasn't. But I don't know where it's going. But I was telling my dad this the other day. Like right now, this is the most fulfilled I've ever felt in my life because I feel like it's something. It's kind of mine. I created it. There's nobody that told me how to do it or how I should do it or how I should be doing it. Like it was just, I had this idea and I chased it and I kind of get to create it by myself, which has been pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's dive into it. So the pivot happened. What are you doing now? Like, why are you the most fulfilled you've ever been?
I mean, it's a loaded question.
We got time,
yeah,
bro.
Yeah. So pretty much my main driving thing right now is snowboarding, but mainly backcountry snowboarding. So it's a mix of alpinism and snowboarding. So most people are familiar with skiing and snowboarding at a resort with lift access. And kind of what I've been drawn to is you go hike whatever you want, and that's where you snowboard. So you're out past the wilderness boundary. There's no safety net or anything like that. You're there with a couple partners, and you pick your terrain and climb whatever mountain it is, and then snowboard down it.
You're literally and figuratively creating your own path.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild adventure, but it's so fulfilling because it's still so new to me. This is my third season ever snowboarding, and I grew up in Florida, which is
I was gonna say, did you grow up in Florida?
Yeah. So pretty far from the mountains. So yeah, it's just this whole new world that I'm getting to explore, and it's the same thing. It's like being comfortable with change. The mountains are constantly changing. So like learning how to tune into that and listen to what the snow's saying and all sorts of stuff. and I've had great mentorship pretty much the whole way, which has been mind blowing for me. Some people that I get to spend time with and learn about the mountains. So it's been pretty awesome so far.
I mean, Tuck, what can you glean from this opportunity? I mean, what I'm hearing is mentorship is super special, which I can imagine when, especially when you're out there. I don't know how dangerous this is. I do know that there is probably some danger attached to it.
Yeah, it's pretty dangerous. I mean, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty high danger for the most
I
part.
was just say it's pretty dangerous, right?
But there's so much that goes into it to give yourself a margin of safety. So that's where the mentorship part comes into it. It's like if you don't know what you're doing and you go out there, it's like, yeah, you're climbing a 14,000-foot mountain with avalanche danger and rockfall and all sorts of stuff. So learning how to navigate that, and when the doors open up and when you can get on stuff and when you can't. All of that is things that you need people around you to learn from.
I mean, what other things are you learning from this opportunity? I can, just knowing you, I can think of things that I think would speak to you, but I don't want to speak for you. So like, what are the nuggets you're gleaning from this, Tug?
Oh, there's so many. I don't know. That's a tough question. It's like, because there's something new like every time. But I think the big one is like going back to adaptivity, is like being able to be comfortable with change, and like something happens and you're flexible and you can make decisions in high pressure situations, which a lot of that, like the baseball background, like learning how to deal with discomfort and questioning yourself, all that stuff. It's like that's transition straight into what I'm doing now. So there were a lot of tools that I got from baseball that I can apply to snowboarding. And
oh man, I always love kicking it with him. This next guest is actually a person that Tucker passed along my info to, but this person's super special. His story is 100% unconventional, and I think this happens with a lot of us. We step into new endeavors with a great deal of imposter syndrome and a great deal of, do I actually have what it takes to utilize not only my potential, but to maximize the type of impact that I want to have? And so with our next guest, I am super excited that we had Harvey on. He's the performance coach of the San Francisco Giants in Major League Baseball. His story is absolutely unconventional, and I hope it reminds us that the soft skills and the skills that we have inside of us are super special. And maybe in this given journey that you're doing right now, maybe they're not being upheld in a special way. But if you've had this sort of feeling in your gut that you should be doing something else, and that something else is something that lights you up, this talk with Harvey, I think, is going to be super special. So Harvey Martin, shout out to you, bro. I loved our conversation. And for those that want to understand a little bit more about how Harvey approaches not only his life, but helps professional athletes to approach theirs through the power of breath, make sure that you go back into the season and listen to the full episode. Hope you guys enjoy. And so I don't know if this is a slight, and it's not meant to be, but it's definitely an unconventional route to where you've gone. So you kind of tapped this into the intro of your book, which I was like, holy shit, this is gold. What was the process to getting where you are today? Because Harv, like it's unconventional. It's like hero's journey type shit.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. It's a hard question to answer, and I've been asked this a lot,
so many times.
And it's hard to answer because a lot of it is it's so simple. And how I got to where I'm sitting in this chair right now, and where I'll explain, I guess, what I do perceivably for work and how I've done certain things. And I understand it, right? Like I can see, it was harder on me when I first got to the big leagues, like, and I would hear things about myself or what people would think about the job titlement or the growth side of it. And it took me a while to kind of like pull outside of it because I was so had blinders on for so long. And then when I started writing a book, or my first company I sold, and the first company I sold was doing pretty good, and it was like, so you had people that you were working. I mean, we were working with the Olympics, WWE, the NFL. So we were consulting across all these. We were with musicians and all this stuff, and then I was coaching in Major League Baseball, and that first year the Giants won 107 wins, and they set this franchise record. So that first year was like a really weird year for me a couple of years ago, because it was like I had these blinders on, and then all of a sudden I was asked that question a lot, and I didn't really prepare for the question. I didn't like see these things coming. It was like a really unique thing. Like I was very unsuccessful, I guess, in like financial ways and business and status, if you want to say, for like so long. And then out of nowhere, like, boom, now you're like the opposite. And that comes with like weird things too. And that comes with things that I also really didn't enjoy. But to answer your question, to the core of it, what happened with me was, to the best way, I try to answer this different, because it's fun for me to answer.
It's a hard question. Like, dude, tell me your story. It's like, there's so much. Like, what do you want to know?
Yeah, there's a lot to it. I think the way I'm trying to answer it right now is the sense of, when I got to college, I got into grad school, and I took a sports psychology class, which is like the consistent story that you'd probably hear on podcasts over the last 6-7 years or so.
Right.
But I got into this grad class, and we were learning about visualization and psychology and how the brain worked. And what was interesting about it was that when I was 15 years old, I was told that nothing wrong with this guy. This guy was like, hey, you're going to play on our JV baseball team. And I was a 15-year-old, and I was like, yeah, I'm just not. I'm going to play on the varsity team. And that was like my first memory in sports of like the first time I had resistance, and I wrote a goal, and I visualized being the starting shortstop, and then boom, like I was playing varsity sports and doing really well. But what was interesting about that was, like, I wrote it down and it worked. So as a superstition, I started writing down all these things.
Right.
And so that was when I was 15. I'm about to turn 34 in a couple of days. I've been journaling and writing my entire life since I was 15. I mean, I have hundreds of journals.
Books.
And it's just gotten so big. Like, I write every day, and I just, it's what I do, and the reason why I share that is because then I get into this grad class, and I hear about visualization, or I hear about psychology, and I'm like, oh man, that's wild. I've been doing that intuitively for 6-7 years. And now there's like someone telling me this is research driven, science driven, and all these things. So that sparks me, because it gave me it like told me what it. I kind of like came out of the shadows now. I was talking about this stuff. I was like, oh, I've been writing, I've been doing, and I got excited about it. And then I got signed with the Milwaukee Brewers, and ironically, that was, in my perspective, 2012, 2013 is when mental skills was kind of like turning the corner to being like a job in sports, and people were like, really looking at that like seriously. They were doing it beforehand, but it just felt like that was when there was actual mental skills coaches and all the affiliates, and people were speaking to you at spring training. And so then I saw that was actually a career path, and I was like, oh, wow, like, that looks like that's right up my alley. And so that was really intriguing to me. So now the irony of this, and I'm sure Tucker told you this, and this is in the book, I end up, 3 years later, I end up having anxiety, and I have the yips, and I start, it just was horrible. Like, Tucker was actually one of the guys who I hit him in a live simulated scrimmage. And I knew the whole day leading up to the scrimmage that he was going to hit. And I knew that I couldn't throw to lefties, and I knew I was going to hit him. And the first pitch, I hit him. And then everyone asked to leave the BP. They didn't want to hit off me. And that was the last time I ever pitched. and that was what ended it. So
I'm sure we can laugh at the pain now, but damn.
Oh, it was wild. It was wild.
So that was your last pitch, and it was Tuck. I would
Yeah,
hit him too. I'd hit
yeah,
him
I
too.
drilled him. I got him good, which is the good news. I got him real good. But the irony of that was, so then I get released for essentially my mind, like, and
Yeah.
I got signed to play professionally because of my mind. That was like
Yeah.
the thing that people tagged me as. Like, they tagged you as this mental skills wise, this thing, and this guy who
Yeah.
can do all these things. And so then I got released, and I was like really embarrassing. And the irony of all that was that when I got released, I was so like confused and didn't really know what was going on. And
Yeah.
the one thing that hit me, and I think I'll try to tie a lot of these dots as I'm sharing this story, is I saw a guy who is now one of my dearest friends. He's one of my closest friends to this day, and I saw him, and he was, I don't know if he'd consider himself a yogi, but we'll use this for the side of the story. He's a yogi in this story, right? And he was a yogi. He's doing yoga, doing breath work all the time. And he was at this gym. And at the gym I trained at was all alpha professional male athletes, and I lived with professional alpha male athletes, and we didn't do yoga and we didn't do breath work. And so I saw this guy, and he was doing breath work. He didn't know I had anxiety, didn't know I got released from the yips. And I had asked him one day, I said, I saw him doing breath work. And I finally, I don't know why this was, but one thing that really struck me deep was I knew I needed to stop being around the same people, as in like pro athletes. And I needed to kind of re-identify, and I needed to try to get open and outside of my space, which is largely why I believe I had the yips psychologically. It's like the idea that you are the thing, you are the character, right? And that was really what happened. So this guy, where I thank him a lot, is he ended up kind of breaking my character. He taught me breath work. He'd have me come to his house, and we would do breath work at his house on Saturdays. And it was just a Wim Hof, Tumo style, fast hyperventilative breath holding. And this was probably around 2015-ish. Wim Hof was I think he had just gone on like Joe Rogan.
Starting,
yeah. And so we were doing this breathing, and then his girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was from Japan. I don't even think she was speaking English yet at this time, but she was a meditation teacher. And so she would do meditation with me and sound bowls with me, and I didn't know what they were doing, but I just I felt
it
better.
Worked.
Yeah. And the other thing this guy would do is he'd tell me to go do cold showers every day. So I would do cold showers. I would go breathe with him on Saturdays. I'd meditate, do sound bowls, and then they were building a wood burning sauna in their backyard at the time. And it just sort of merged that in these Saturdays we ended up doing breath work. I would bring up a cold tub, we'd sauna, we'd cold, we'd do breath work, we'd sauna, we'd cold, and we'd do this for hours. And I wasn't telling anybody because it was it was my own little sacred space. And the reason why this question has been harder to answer, but I'm going to get to the direct answer of it because it's so simple. I was so down and out that I literally would go on these Saturdays and do this day. And it was I would leave and I'd be like, dude, that made me feel something. I feel happy. I feel alive. I'm thinking, I'm growing, I'm doing all these things. And I couldn't understand why. But one day it just hit me where I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else.
Man, I can tell you right now that my relationship with my breath and my relationship with the present moment has exponentially grown strictly from that conversation. So like I said in the introduction of Harvey's real quick talk, if you want to hear more about the conversation and understand a little bit more about the power of breath and the power of now, I encourage you to go back. This next guest is a dear friend. He's actually someone that I had the pleasure of meeting through working together in some of our high performance programs. I want to introduce to you JB Clark. He's a professional storyteller and someone that is lighting up the space inside of fat advocacy. Because if you think about it, there's an attack on people's body size, which I think is so freaking weird. It's a human experience that I can't exactly explain because of the amount of fat phobia that goes on. In this conversation, we're going to understand a little bit of JB's story, what brought him to working with us, and the type of tools and value systems that he was able to create rather and some of his own work. I think this episode is something that is super special to me because I've been able to get a front row seat into this man's journey. And I know you're going to get a lot of value from this as well. I hope you enjoy.
Oh, they're super connected, which like, duh,
Yeah.
I have a neck.
Oh my God, I totally forgot about I'm so glad that we're talking about this now, because now like everything is coming back to me. That was the one thing in our preliminary conversation that you kept coming back to. Like we couldn't really paint a picture of what you were looking for outside of, hey, just I want to be a resident in my body again. Because I tend to find this a lot, and this is something that happened very early on. We talked about romanticizing habits and rituals that no longer serve you. But you were like really good at that. You were a freaking ninja, because it was like, listen, man, I know I need to change these things, but do you know what it feels like to do X, Y, and Z, and then pump out a paper, and then pump out a song, and then launch a podcast? Like, it's great. And I'm like, the latter sounds great, but do we need all these other things?
Yeah, and it's like you're not really getting to the launch part, big guy. You think maybe we're burning everything down?
Yeah.
Beforehand into a pile of ash, and it's like, no, that's just the cigarettes from last night. And you're like, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So a lot of the stuff we worked on was like reframing. So I guess how I'd gotten there was I've always had disordered eating. I've always been in a big old body, right? Since I was a kid. Grew up on a farm in Texas. Like my family's big. We're big people.
Yeah, if you can't tell, JB has a southern drawl, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, Texas, Mississippi, big people, big family. We're loud. We're like ideological. We take up a lot of space. Like, and so that's not always celebrated in culture. And when I was a kid, like that's just like, it was bad to be fat and gay. Luckily, it's 2023. You can be both of those things in most communities, and people are happy for you, and that's great. But sort of like taking those stories back is a big part of reframing. So if I'm fat and that's bad, right? Well, then I've got to get better. My body doesn't deserve to be fueled because it isn't fitting into the standards that I expect from it. I don't deserve to rest because I need to go work out. Like I was just constantly injuring myself, exercising. It was never that I like got so fat or whatever that I didn't play sports. Like I've always been this big. I've climbed mountains. I'm playing a hockey doubleheader this Saturday, and like I'm not worried about it.
No.
Yeah, so like it's just that size thing. So once I got over that like size piece and use it to my advantage, then we're not like telling a story about punishment. Then it's like, okay, like it's fine if you don't run this week 3 times because you bruised your tailbone 2 weeks ago.
I know,
and
right?
You've got a double header to tomorrow, and you're sure not going to sit out your hockey game. So like, don't go to the gym today. Like it's okay. You don't have to punish yourself. And so finding that balance between like, it's like, well, what if I let myself slack off? It's like, is that the kind of person you are? No. Build a routine. And if you need to break it, that rule that day, that's fine. That's fine. Just find that balance. And so once I could balance that story, like, oh, I'm not fat because it's bad. I'm just fat because I'm JB. And like my family has had, like there's just generations of like all kinds of like scarcity and food trauma and stuff like that goes just into, body size. And who cares? Like my captain, the other day was like, hey man, I need you to switch over to this side when we're taking face-offs in their end because I need you in front of that goal. Like he was like 5 feet tall even. He's like, I don't need to be in front of that goal. I need a 6. Like on skates, I'm like, I look like a 6'5", 400 pound. Like, and I'm fat.
Big dude.
Like I do squats and run and swim. Like I'm fast on skates. I'm not quick. I
got a booty.
Yeah, I do. I didn't have a booty before we started hanging out. You made me do so many squats.
Dude, so many. You know what's really great, JB, about you? I don't think we've actually really talked about this, but I feel like you deserve some flowers here. Having been in the career field for as long as I have just from the standpoint of nutrition and dietetics, I think oftentimes when you think about dietitian, you think, first word that comes up is diet, right? And I think what's been really hard working with people, especially people who consider themselves fat and obese, is that coming into it, it's like something's inherently wrong with me. Like I need to change. And what's nice about 2023 is we're actually starting to explore the conversation around like, hey, you know, the obesity metric, it's not a tell all. Like it is one piece of the puzzle. And if
we just threw BMI out, like the WHO just threw it out.
It's a good time, right?
Praises
it's a good time to be talking shit to all the people who have been going in on obesity as a choice, like all the fucking
now Dwayne Johnson's doctors can quit having to hand him that sheet of paper about weight loss every time he comes in.
Dude,
doctors were legally mandated to give me like have certain conversations with me before they could address any other issues because of my weight. And it's like,
JB, here's
when I got a doctor who quit doing that, my blood pressure went down immediately. Did my weight change? Absolutely not. I gained 10 pounds because I was doing a ton of squats at the time and I had to buy new pants. But like my blood pressure went down. So I care about health, not about size. That's the thing I had to learn. Is like I care about health, not about size.
You know what was really great though, JB, is like what I felt like through the process is there wasn't really any moments where you felt tied to like a certain size goal. Because I think very early on, we started to establish this theme around being a resident in your body, and we started to establish what performance looks like for you. And that extended to not only just athletic performance, but also cognitive, also your sleep performance, also how you're showing up in your family, like all of these really beautiful things that kind of make all the, you know, cool JB parts. I love that about you. And I love that about working with you because it's not something that a whole lot of people share. And I feel like it takes a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of fortitude to get to that point where you're like, you know what, this isn't really about my need to change my body, but rather like how I feel in my body, which again speaks to how can I be a resident in my body, man. So I don't think that I've said those words to you, but dude,
man, I appreciate that.
I love it, man. That's what makes you special.
So, well, and that was that reframing of all of it because stress and shame. So I do some research on this. I did some of this for my master's program and got a little busy, so I'm not keeping up. But you asked me at least quarterly, hey man, how's that thing?
I know.
The paper's out there. We can link to it. And there's some stuff on my website, but basically about shame and fat shame specifically, but shame is shame. Mm-hmm. And that the link between shame and cortisol and stress and cortisol production and the link between cortisol and inflammation. So like half the stuff that we said was BMI related is cortisol related. And you gain weight and also just size when that's inflammation. Cortisol is inflammation, right? We know that that's basically just like the enemy of all things. Yeah. So like if you're at work and you're like, I got to get stressed out so that I can get more stuff done. I got to set an unrealistic goal. If you don't do that, you'll be healthier and you'll do probably more because you'll be a healthier. But that's the thing is like, you have to have somebody come alongside you and be like, you have to draw this boundary. That was who Dezi was for me. It's going to suck for everybody around you and you feel like you're holding up the whole, but you have to draw this boundary and then figure out what you can handle. And so drawing those boundaries, you get to say like, this is an acceptable amount of work for me. And then whenever you're not stressed the whole time, you're like, oh, cool. I can actually knock out like 3 more things. And then I'm going to hit the gym because that's what I do at this time every day because it's a routine. Yeah. And then you're at the gym feeling good about your work day and good about your body. And so you get endorphins. You don't get, and look, cortisol also, that's a drug, you know, like my therapist all the time is like, you getting back on those cortisol hits?
Yeah.
Like, oh, geez. You know, he'll start talking to me like I'm a meth addict, but cortisol. Yeah. And that's what it is. Cortisol is like, you know, Adderall or whatever. And so it triggers those fight or flight metrics. And so if you go to the gym and do the endorphin route instead, hey, this is fun. I like, and not like I got to do these because I got to be a certain size, but like I'm going to go to the gym and use the machine that makes me happy. Yeah. And then you're happy. And then if you want to, you know, if you want something else, like figure out a way, you know, like what's the way that you can make your goals and your values and your story sort of align. And so if you can do that with your, you know, like I want to be healthier, well, like go to sleep. Your cortisol is going to be less. You're going to, you know, you know, who cares what weight you end up being in the end, but it's also fun when you lose all that inflammation and you've gained like 15 pounds lifting weights or whatever. And somebody's like, oh my God, you've lost a ton of weight. You can look at them and be like, I gained 15 pounds actually. It's you kind of blow. They'd be like, oh no, I'm like way healthier. Yeah, you're right. I'm like way healthier. But I'm like huge.
Yeah. Right now. Well, I mean, the whole process has really, JB, been a bunch of pivots on your end. And again, having that front row seat, what I thought was really great about our process, and this is, most people don't understand the link between sleep, exercise, nutrition, mental well-being. Like they don't understand that it's exactly, and creativity, right? And
that's the thing,
I
is like,
guess
I'm a
human
creative
performance, if you will.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the second that I saw that, like, my brain power, like my creativity could be better, like I could produce better creative work if I was more physically healthy. That was when you linked that for me. I was like, yeah, all right, well, now we have to.
Which is crazy because like now there's kind of this new wave, especially in the hip hop community, of artists being sober, right? Isaiah Rashad, Kendrick. So like it's having people start to explore, like Danny Brown, same thing, like having people start to explore like what it means to actually throw yourself into creativity and how that stems into how you spend your time and who you spend your time with.
Oh, for
which
sure.
is so fucking cliche. Like people might think like, oh, well, duh, Dezi, listen, if you don't have very good people surrounding you and you're also not taking care of yourself, like you have a formula for fucking disaster really, really quick if you're not feeling it already.
Well, and it's just, I mean, it goes into like, even like, are you hanging out with people? All right, well, that's not, you're not creating, you know, like, are you choosing endorphins or cortisol in this moment? Like you have to have that balance and health everywhere. And like, look, cortisol is great, but you got to save it. You got to save it up for like,
it has its role. Yes.
Yeah. When you see a bear, let's get that hit. Let's roll. You know, let's climb that tree. Let's identify, you know, grizzly bear, climb the tree, black bear, fall down, pretend, you know, like let's, or whatever it is.
If you're in a fucking rec league, on skates, in Fort Worth on a Saturday in a doubleheader, and
you need some cortisol.
The defenseman is coming at you. You just fall to the ground. Act like you're dead.
Oh yeah. Yo, last week a guy who was 5 even, I swear to you, was trying to fight me. I'm not like punching me, slashing me, and I was just like, you're mad at me because you skated into me and fell over. Why do you think you're gonna get new results? It's like I wish, you know, and I didn't even get mad at him. I just thought like, I wonder what's going on at home, man. I hope he's getting a release out here.
Which is loving of an individual do you have to be in the thralls of competition, and something like that happens, and just be thinking about the other person? JV, you're better than me.
That dude
for that reason.
Me, and I had that thought, and then I was like, man, this is great. You know, like draw some boundaries. It really is like, I don't know, it's a whole thing.
Well, I mean, so if we look at the trajectory of not only just at the beginning, our coaching relationship, and then what that stemmed into, is what we found is the more that you took care of yourself, the more that you can throw yourself into your creative endeavors, because the foundation was already laid, right? And mind you, like there was no perfection in that process. There were times where you were like, you know what, I need a little break. I'm going to go do that and I'll be right back. And I really loved and resonated with that. I like to call them my Dennis Rodman moments. Like, listen, man, sometimes I just want to fucking party.
I'm going to go smoke cigars with my boys in Vegas for a minute.
Yeah, I'll be back. I just want to party. 48 hours.
You know what's fun is if like you're super healthy, you can sign up, like you can reach out to the people in your life and you can sort of set those up in advance and then pretend like you're having a Dennis Rodman moment. But really everybody's already like got the babysitting handled for you so that you can go like smoke cigarettes with your friends and watch punk bands. But you could be like, I'm out of here. This is dumb. And hit the road. And everybody's like, he said he was going to do that last week just so that we wouldn't get mad.
Yeah. Just let everyone that's on the email thread, JV's good. He'll be right back.
Yeah, he's cool. It's like wrestling. We wrote it out.
Yeah. But I think like looking back, there's been these like moments of pivoting for you. And I think what has been really fantastic is over the course of our time working together, you know, almost 2 years, man, crazy, probably a little bit more than that.
Is it 3 now?
I think it's been 3. I think it's
2020 or 2021.
I think it's 2020. Yeah, because that's when
October 2020.
Yeah, that's when the squats happened, because we had our strength conditioning coach doing live workouts for us. Squats. Oh my God, Squatsober was nasty. Anyway, but what was really great about your process is like over the first 2 years. It was about how you're spending your time, right? And I think what has been really cool this last year is you've thrown yourself into some really cool and creative endeavors that are looking at what I would refer to as marginalized groups in this case, right? Because I think when we look at the topic of fat phobia, it's not something that people want to talk about, because let's be honest, a lot of people who might hear this podcast, I hope our community are checking some of your privilege to a larger extent, are very fat phobic. And JB, you've gotten into an endeavor that I think is super interesting that I would love to pick your brain on from the standpoint of what started this process, what are you finding out, and where's that going?
So I think early on you would sort of challenge me to like, you'd been asking me about my story and you kind of said, so you have been an athlete. And I was always like, I don't know. Like, no. And you kind of read back, like climb mountains, like playing hockey, played, this and that. And
so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You're running off and on. It's like, oh, why don't you run? Oh, I always get hurt. Okay, well, what if we did it gingerly, And so you got me going on that.
What if we took care of yourself? I don't know. Recover.
Yeah, what if we got some knee braces? What if we only did it once a week? What if we took a walk? What if we got some ice? And I realized like, oh, I love running. And then I don't know, being out there, I kept running into like people just treating me bad. I remember, and this seems fine. He probably thought he was helping me, but a guy like smoking a cigar stopped me and he was like telling me about how I got to hydrate and I got to be careful. And I was like, I need to not be next to your cigar. It's 100 degrees. Yeah. I need to not be, I'm a roll.
How about you not blow this in my face right now?
Yeah. And then, people kind of, I ran into this thing. I was trying to figure out like a way to sort of look at, I wanted to look at speed according to weight because I was just curious, like how fast 300-pound people run 10Ks.
Yeah.
And there's so much hate. People just being like, they should just lose weight to become a runner. And it's like, bro, I ran 100 miles last month and I'm 300 pounds. I was 300 pounds when I started. It's like, if I could have ran more, I would have. I just have kids and a job. Like, it's like this idea that's just like, you have to get in shape before you're welcome in these communities. So I started doing some research. I was in a communications program. I'm a storyteller professionally, and I was getting my master's in science of communications, which is like a research-based program. And so I started looking at the data around shame communications and the health community. And it's just like, we cannot expect fat people to get healthier while treating them poorly. We cannot expect 100%. Fat people to have better health outcomes while discouraging them from visiting the doctor. We cannot expect fat people to engage in physical activity and group physical activity, which is super good for you, if we make them feel bad when they show up to the gym.
Whew. All right, y'all. This is that moment where we bid you farewell until next time. Season 8 has been super special. I don't think that I recognize the power of pivoting in your life until I started recording these episodes. If you remember correctly, in our first, season premiere, I talked about how I actually did some organization in my life and recorded a lot of these episodes beforehand. So I had no intention of talking about the pivot. I understood that if you are someone who is an athlete to any sort of degree, that there were those moments in your life where you knew you probably had to pivot into something else. And even if you're someone who is on the athlete side of just like really looking to move your body, the pivot speaks to you because each and every one of us have been in those really vulnerable moments of understanding and recognizing, as we brought in awareness, that we were going down a path that we didn't feel was aligned with us anymore. And so we went out on that venture, went to that next thing, whether it's a health journey, whether it's an environment, a relationship, a business, whether it's career, whatever that is in your life, all of us at some point has felt that. And if you've been lucky enough to trust your gut and to go out and do the next scary thing, the process has probably been really kind to you. Now, if you're on the other end, and this is usually the type of end that I'm on, you try to deny it until life or the universe or whoever you think is depicting your life, it pushes you in that direction. It makes you go in that direction. Both endeavors, I would believe, are still lucky because you end up in a space, in a place that you were meant to be. The universe, life doesn't make any mistakes. So if we can pull from these experiences, if we can pull from these stories, if we can pull from people that motivate us, we can go out and do that next scary thing. So what's next for us in the Can't Believe I Made It podcast? As your host, Dez here, I'm going to be taking a much needed break as we end 2023 and as we head into 2024. I'm not entirely sure what the theme is going to be just yet. But over our break, I'm going to be having conversations. I'm going to be having guests on. And I think one thing that I think has really spoke to me is that you all really love these episodes. So I'm going to be going back into the archives, if you will, and doing some more storytelling, because I think for me, that's how I find relation to really beautiful stories, is finding how I can apply someone's story and how I can apply a theme into my life. And so we're looking to do that in 2024 for season 9. And I think another piece here that I think is super special is also understanding when it's okay to take a break. And I think for me, if I'm trying to practice what I preach, I'm heading into a moment in my life where I would love to be present for some of the things that I absolutely love. And it's not that you guys aren't on my favorite list. I love pouring in. It's crazy to me that we are above 11,000 listens, that 11,000 people felt the need to listen to a kid from Tucson, Arizona. That to me is just, the power is palpable. And it reminds me as I step into my 38th year of life. You know, we started this podcast, you know, when I turned, I want to say 30, 36, 35 or 36. I can't remember which, but we started on my birthday because I was at a point in my life where I was done gathering information and I was done being afraid of whether this would absolutely flop and whether no one would listen. But I think what it helps me to understand, and what I also help it helps you to understand, is that everything is a process. If you pour into it and you show up as your authentic self, really phenomenal and beautiful things will happen. And I can't tell you how grateful I am to you all as this community and listeners. It's crazy. The type of opportunities that I've been able to experience because of this is all due to you. So, like I said, I'm going to be taking a much needed break. I hope you all get to take a break as well. Be okay with taking a break so that you can regenerate and look at those next steps. I hope this episode reminds you that you are special, you are worth it, and you have value inside of you. You just might not be thriving because you're not in the right environment. I love you guys. I'll catch you in 2024. Peace.